What's up, folks? I want to talk about what monsters do in Path of Exile 2. Because to me, right now, combat feels a little monotone. It feels more so like a Vampire Survivors type of clone than it does an action RPG with a complex and challenging combat system, and that sounds like what the developers are trying to go for, so I want to give some feedback as to things I'm noticing and things that I think the game really needs to incentivize the player to actively engage in combat. Now, this is not going to be for everybody, right? Not everybody wants that type of combat. Some people do want this to be their second monitored game, but I can only give feedback on the way that I would like to be playing the game, so that's what I'm going to be doing. And there's basically two areas that I feel are currently the problem, or the monotoneness is coming from two specific areas in the combat. Not necessarily a problem, just not very complex. So, the first thing is, if you look at the way that monsters work in Path of Exile 2, you'll notice that most of the monsters are kind of magnetized to you. It doesn't matter if they're melee, it doesn't matter if they're range, magic, whatever it is, they're magnetized to you and they're coming in, they're gonna try to do damage to your face. Now, of course, that makes sense for most applications because that's what the monsters are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be putting pressure on you to try to kill you so that you have to kill them. And that's fine. But the current implementation is very similar to a Vampire Survivors clone. So if we look at a game like Rogue Ganessia, which is a Vampire Survivors clone, your character starts off, monsters start walking towards you, and you have to kill them. This gives you upgrades, levels, and all that stuff as you go throughout the frame, just like in Path of Exile 2. But realistically, what the monsters are doing is just trying to get to you and do damage to you in some way, some capacity. Now, if we look at footage from Path of Exile 2, it's about the same style of thing. All monsters, sans maybe like 2 or 3 out of the 500, their entire goal is to exist and get to you as the player to deal damage to you. There is no things that on the battlefield that the player has to be looking out for or interacting with or understanding that they are happening in specific ways. There's no, as much as people hate it, there's no proxy bubble to force the player to go in to a certain range and deal damage there. There's no pylon keeping other mobs alive that you have to kill the pylon. There's no mages putting up ice walls or flame walls or melee dudes putting up rock shields to try to prevent damage from other units being taken. There's no zone control almost at all. The player is essentially just incentivized to kill things that are on their screen because those things can kill them, and there is no other interaction between those elements of monsters, and it just kind of makes for a monotone experience. Yeah, sure, it's fun to run around a map and killing stuff just, with lightning spear, one-clicking them away, but realistically, if you want to make a challenging and complex combat system that, incentivizes the player to be active and doing all these cool things, you need to make it so the battlefield is more advanced as well, more, difficult to look at it right away, but you learn these things, right? You learn that a pack of mobs will spawn with 3 spear dudes, 7 mages, and 2 shield dudes, and the shield dudes are going to try to stop the mages from getting hit, and then there might be a buffer in there somewhere, and you see these kind of interactions on the battlefield, and you get used to being like, oh, I have to get in there and I have to kill the mages because they heal the shield guys, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, once you get to a certain level of damage, all of this can go away, but in the beginning, if you really want to make a combat system feel active and more complex, you really need to have these groups of mobs that spawn in and do more than just try to get to the player, because right now that's really what the monsters are doing. The second area of combat that I feel is kind of relatively weak, we have to go back to Path of Exile 1 and talk about what Path of Exile 1's default state is, and that comparison to Path of Exile 2. Let me explain. In Path of Exile 1, when you're standing still, your default state is standing still. If you left-click, you start moving. If you right-click, you start attacking. But if you're right-clicking, you are standing still, and you cannot be moving, sans, Flicker Strike and Cyclone. Exceptions always exist. But your default state in Path of Exile 1 is you are standing still, and either you are making the conscious choice to move, or you are making the choice to stay still and attack. This means that by staying still and attacking, you have made the assessment on the battlefield that you are able to stand in that spot and deal damage. Is that always the right assessment, and do you sometimes die as a result of this? Yes, but that is a choice you are subconsciously or consciously making, and you're having to make that choice. If you want to then stop attacking and move, you give up the ability to attack to make the choice to move, whether that be through the actual just moving around with a Quicksilver or whatever have you, or using a movement skill. This is in contrast to what is in Path of Exile 2. In Path of Exile 2, your default state is actually moving. You are pretty much incentivized to always be moving. There isn't much in the form of standing your ground or worrying about, when you can attack. Some weapons, of course, are a little different than others, but for bows, crossbows, spells, a lot of the stuff, your default state is moving. This requires mobs to chase you down. It requires mobs to be able to glue themselves to you, otherwise they can't do damage to you. So it feeds back into this loop of making the mobs just be magnetized to you by having you be able to constantly keep on the move, constantly keep kiting, constantly keep rolling backwards while still dealing damage. You don't have to make that choice, and since that choice doesn't exist, it's an element of the combat, it's a layer of the combat that's kind of been taken away from playing Path of Exile by just having it automated as you are moving, you can deal damage, the monsters will have to deal with you. This also applies to things like a bridge. If you're going to be walking across a bridge in Path of Exile 2, you're just walking across that bridge. Versus if you look at something like Path of Exile 1, when you come into a room, that has a small bridge in the center of it, you know that you could just walk across it. You'll get to the end just fine, especially if you have a Quicksilver, but you do have the ability to subconsciously or consciously see that you could maybe jump that ledge with a flame dash and then walk a little bit more. Oh, you could cut this ledge with a flame dash as well. And by being able to do that, you are actively making it so you have you're perceiving what's happening on your screen and making small but conscious choices to that combat, to that flow of the battlefield. And how this interacts with the first point in this video is, if there was something like proxy bubbles or something putting down shield walls, or there was mobs in the back of a pack that you had to get to, the current system without a movement skill making you go into combat forward instead of always walking backwards in combat can't exist. Without a movement skill, we can't get to the point where we can jump into combat in a good way. Sans, maybe like the staff skills that allow you to leap forward and stuff like that, but in general, it would feel really bad then to be on like a crossbow character where you don't have that kind of forwards momentum ability if they were to implement mobs that were at the back of the pack and you had to get to them fast and first and get rid of them to make that active combat feel like it's more active. If we don't have movement skills, we will not be able to actually utilize those kind of mechanics in the game. Movement skills get brought up a lot about talking about moving around because the areas are so big. The real thing that makes them good is the fact that they allow for a player to have active choices in their positioning within combat, allowing the developers to develop monsters that require active positioning. If everything is just walking is never going to be very interesting because it's a passive experience. And one of the reasons right now that sometimes the monotony of the combat really shines is when you are walking towards a pack of mobs, realize that pack of mobs is walking towards you and walking at you fast enough that they might be a danger, and you just start walking backwards. There's a lot of kiting backwards in the game, and doing a combat style that's 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, 7 steps forward again, over and over again, does get pretty boring pretty quick. So realistically, I'd rather not see reliance on the ability of the player to just keep always moving. I know it feels good in the beginning to do that kind of combat, to make that kind of interactive choice that like, oh, I can cast while moving and all this stuff. But realistically, if you don't have a reason to ever stand still, if you don't have a reason to hold your ground, the mobs will always have to be chasing you. They'll always have to be running you down. They'll always have to be in some way be able to get into your face. And at some point, that's going to feel kind of crap to deal with over and over again, because you're either going to blow them up really quickly or feel like you're always getting chased without, a good reason to go forwards in combat. You're always going to go backwards. You're always going to CC and step backwards. You're all going to do an ice nova or whatever you're going to do, and your goal is to always go backwards. I would want to make combat so that there is reasons to go forwards. There's reasons to dive past a group of mobs and get to something behind it, because it's going to make the combat feel a lot more dynamic. It's going to make it so that there is awareness on the battlefield, and that there are skills that the developers can give monsters that aren't just damage. There's going to be ice walls and shield walls and zone control and all these things. You're going to be able to go around terrain to get to a mob you want to get to. These are things that they can add into the game if they give us the ability to have active forwards combat. So those are really the two things for me right now that are making combat feel really monotone and more so like a Vampire Survivors clone than an actual action RPG where I'm making choices, making combat in some way dynamic and fluid and interesting. I really would like to rather not sit around in holding down, left and right click and just suctioning in all the loot as it comes in. I know some people want that, but the Path of Exile 1 is there for that, where in terms of just running around, blast the screen, click some loot, all that stuff. I want Path of Exile 2 to be the thing that they've touted Path of Exile 2 to be, which is supposed to be a more involved, complex, challenging combat system. And currently, mobs that just chase you down are not challenging. You just walk backwards and do a couple barrel rolls here and there, and if you get surrounded, well, just walk in circles. It's really not a very evolved combat system, and it's hard for me to say that this critique is fair right now, because we know that there's more acts coming, we know that there's more monsters coming, so maybe those monsters will add it to the variety of the combat, but at the same time, I'm not seeing any seeds of what would make that right now a reality, what would make that work in the current combat system. So I want to see more monsters and more active gameplay from those monsters involving the player than that just doing damage. I want to see other things. So those are two things right now that I feel are making the combat system pretty monotone. Tell me how you feel in the comments below, because I don't know. I don't know if this is what everybody wants, probably not, but I know it's what I want. I know I want to be more active in the combat. I don't want it to be a second monitor game, and when I can play the game by just reading my Twitch chat all day, it doesn't feel as active as it should be, and it kind of makes me sad that we're already at this state. But hey, that's just my opinion, some feedback on the game, and hope you enjoyed watching.